Hi everyone. In the previous session, we were talking about the principles of water governance, where we discussed the OECD principles on water governance. We did talk about the first 8 principles that target the enhancing the effectiveness in water governance and enhancing the efficiency in the water governance. The OECD suggested a total of 12 principles. The remaining 4, the principle 9 and onwards, target on enhancing the trust and engagement in water governance. So, the principle 9 of OECD on water governance suggests that mainstream integrity and transparency practices across water policies, water institution and water governance framework for greater accountability and trust in decision making. Now, this integrity and transparency, which is the main motto of this principle, can be achieved by promoting the legal and institutional framework that hold decision makers and stakeholders accountable. So, such as the right to information and independent authorities to investigate water related issues and law enforcement. So, if we have, let us say, such mechanism where one can seek the information through right to information or that kind of thing, there are independent authorities to investigate the water related issues and law, whether they are being properly enforced or not. So, this sort of legal and institutional framework, if it is there, so it helps the decision makers responsible and accountable for the water policies they are developing, and if such systems exist, it will enhance the trust in the water governance system and engagement of various stakeholders. So, I know that if my rights are not being fulfilled, I can pull this specific policy maker or implementer into the judiciary. I can get him penalized for not doing his duty, I can hold him responsible. So, if I have that kind of support system, that will sort of enhance my trust on the utility of service, that because if they are not doing their duty, they are likely to be penalized. So, that will enhance my trust that they should or they will be actually doing their duties properly, they will be performing their task, whether it is of policy making or it is of implementation or it is of operation and maintenance or the day to day regulation. So, that kind of trust develops if the systems are transparent and there are authorities that can authorities that listen to the public, listen to the stakeholders, ultimate stakeholders. There has to be encouraging norms, code of conduct and charters on the integrity and transparency of the national and local context for the monitoring and implementation purpose. Further, establishing clear accountability and control mechanism for transparent water policy making and implementation is very essential and was included in the OECD principles. Then, diagnosing and mapping on a regular basis the existing and potential driver of corruption and risk in water related institution at different level. So, there has to be a close eye, close watch, or there has to be a system where it could be diagnosed and mapped that whether the financial transactions or financial involvements of the different labels of managers. So, where are the potential drivers where that could lead to some sort of corruption, that could lead to some sort of mismanagement. So, all these things should be identified and should be monitored and mapped on a regular basis in order to keep a close eye on the developments taking place, and then adopting multi-stakeholder approach, dedicated tools and action plans to identify and address the integrity and transparency gaps involving all the stakeholders. So, that is again of very high importance. Then the principle 10 suggests promote stakeholder engagement for informed and outcome oriented contribution to water policy design and implementation. This we have been discussing from the very beginning of this course that water management should not be a subject of a government or subject of a state only, and more and more of stakeholder involvements are ensured, more and more input will be there, and the more better governance practices, governance mechanisms could be devised, which is sort of socially inclusive. So, for this purpose one need to map the public, private and non-profit actors who will have a stake in the outcome in the water management policies or water management schemes. Okay. What are their level of responsibility, their level of involvement and their core motivation for interaction. Okay. A company will likely to interact for business purpose, a civil society is likely to interact for improving the social life, a government official have the key role and responsibility of managing the services. Okay. So, there could be basically different stakeholders with different core motivations. Okay. Now, this needs to be identified, paying special attention to underrepresented categories, okay, whether youth, poor, women, indigenous people, domestic users, then newcomers who are the like property developers, institutional investors, all those type of stakeholders, and other water related stakeholders and institutions should be paid special attention. So, what are the requirement of youth, what are the requirement of the poor and deprived, what are the requirement of women. So, all these needs sort of some further special attention. Then defining the line of decision making and expected use of stakeholders input. It is not necessary that when we say that we need to involve different stakeholders, it does not mean that we take the input from all the stakeholders and incorporate it. The involvement of stakeholder needs to be perceived in a very clear and distinct manner, that remember we discussed what are their core motivation. So, if a industry, let us say a water industry is having its motivation of profit oriented, they suggest that okay, this is the best policy in the market available, right. Now, even if it is an expert company, if we take their saying and invest in certain specific type of technology, which the industry at that particular industry may have vested experience, vested interest in that particular technology, and in fact that technology may not be the most suitable for the said purpose or for the given conditions. So, it is not necessary that whatever inputs we receive from the stakeholders or for that matter NGOs. Okay. So, NGO also have their own set motivation at times. Okay. There is some NGOs, so without holistically looking the picture, without properly understanding the picture, they may come and they may start giving input and giving feedback that no, this is or certain policy should be of this particular specific type. For example, let us say construction of a dam. Okay. So, there are NGOs that without even proper understanding what is the objective of the construction of dam, what is the social relevance of this, what is the social costs, social benefits, they will come and start making noise that no, we do not want dam over this river or over this channel or over this canal. Okay. So, it is not necessarily that the input that we are getting from such places or even civil societies or even NGOs, you know what kind of input we receive from the civil society these days. Okay. They will come with a rally that make water free. Now, that is the input from the civil society, but do policy makers should always take these inputs and decide policies based on these inputs only, or rather go for having a sort of survey for willingness to pay and then decide for the prices. Okay. The public agitation or public input many times is modeled or moduled in a specific fashion, which may or may not be always the best way to go forward. So, the inputs from the stakeholders should always be taken, but again it relies onto the sort of the goal of the state, goal of the government, the motivation or the input from the experts, okay, who are the water expert, financial experts, economic experts, environmental experts. So, then the inputs received from different stakeholders should be assessed accordingly, whether it is proper or improper, whether one should incorporate these inputs. We should basically set or target our policies in order to aligning along with the inputs received from the different stakeholders, or those inputs can be dumped simply. So, that also is a possibility. It is not necessarily that all the inputs received should always be considered. Okay. The state or the experts should have that power or authority to dump some of the wasteful inputs. Okay. Then encouraging capacity development of relevant stakeholders as well as accurate, timely and reliable information, as we discussed earlier as well. There is another approach through assessing the process and outcome of stakeholders engagement. Okay. Now, this is again a very crucial point. We call about stakeholders engagement, but there has to be an assessment of the stakeholders engagement as well, that okay, we are getting inputs from this, how much energy or how much resource is being utilized in analyzing those inputs, what kind of the crucial information or what kind of the suggestions we are receiving from those inputs. The inputs should actually be more of the information type is always welcome, but input in terms of sort of policy suggestions or decision making suggestions may or may not be worthy to consider at times. So, how much is the sort of what is the total benefit of engagement process again needs to be assessed. What is the total cost and benefits of the engagement process, engagement of different stakeholders also need to be assessed. Then promotion of the legal and institutional framework, organizational structure and responsible authorities that are conducive to the stakeholders engagement should be there. Okay. So, those authorities, those key person which are open to the suggestions or nice to the stakeholders, nice to the people, nice to the end users should get some sort of incentive or promotion. The customizing the type and level of stakeholders engagement to the need and keeping the process flexible to adopt the changing circumstances is also of vital importance as suggested. Then we have the next principle which is to encourage water governance framework that help manage trade-offs across water users, rural and urban areas and generations. So, one should have a sort of clear policy for promoting non-discriminatory participation in decision making across different people, which is sort of engagement of the engagement of the different stakeholders, especially from the vulnerable groups and people living in the remote area, and the authorities at local scale or regional scale should be empowered to identify and address the barriers across the quality water services and resources, and promoting rural urban cooperation, including the greater partnership between the water institution and special partners. So, what happens that we discussed earlier, that there are times when we need to manage the trade-offs, particularly when there is a limited resource could be in terms of water, or resource could be in terms of funds also. Okay. So, when we have limited, let us say financial resources, where to allocate that financial resources? Now, if we are investing into the water services, ensuring for the domestic supply, the agriculture is going to be suffer. If we are ensuring it to be for agriculture and domestic, the industry may suffer. So, there has to be some trade offs between these, particularly when there is a limited resources, and that needs to be sort of a needs to be under a proper framework. Okay. There has to be a clear cut guideline or framework for such trade offs, that which sector should be given priority under what circumstances. Okay. That sort of policy promotion and then the engagement needs to be ensured. There has to be like public debates on the risk and cost associated with the services, what is too much, what is too little, what is too polluted, okay, water, and then raise awareness, build consensus on who pays for what. Okay. The government, if giving subsidy, it should be in the knowledge of public that they are getting subsidy. Otherwise, they consider that okay, if somebody is saying, let us say 50 rupees per month for a water services. So, the household, if he is not being informed and he is not being told that total cost of water supply to his household is actually 1000 rupees in a month and not just 50 that he is paying. So, then only he will know that okay, there is some additional value and I am getting, let us say 950 rupees in the form of subsidy from the government or cross subsidy from the other users who are paying for my water. On the other hand, if such mechanism or such system or such information is not available, then what people just say, okay, I am paying for water, right. They do not exactly know that they are paying far less than the cost which is likely to incur in ensuring the water supply to their household. So, this kind of thing is very important. Further, people should be made aware that okay, what is the water consumption pattern across other different regions, whether they are using too high, okay, or they are doing good in terms of like water saving. So, if they are doing good, then also they should be appreciated, they should be told that okay, we are working on such and such systems and we are standing in comparison to the where we are standing in comparison to the other good managed system. What is polluted, okay, what are the different pollution parameters, how which water to use, which water not to use. So, all these awareness should be raised and there has to be evidence based assessment of the distributional consequences of water related policies on citizen water use and places to guide decision making. So, this is also needs to be incorporated for the enhancing the trust and engagement of the public in water governance systems. The last principle, the last OECD principle on water governance suggests that promotion of the regular monitoring and evaluation of water policy and governance where appropriate, share the results with the public and make adjustment when needed. Now, a water policy or a water practice or a water services is installed, but there has to be periodical monitoring and evaluation of that services. Then the whatsoever are the gaps or whatsoever are the demerits in the system should be clearly identified, should be informed to the public, take the inputs from the public, okay, and accordingly the policy could be revised or could be amended, or the technology adaptation can be improved. So, all those things can be done only with regular monitoring and evaluation or periodic monitoring and regulation. So, this sort of set for promoting dedicated institutions for monitoring and evaluation. If we have a dedicated institution whose role and responsibility is to monitor only, like we have in financial this thing, we have an audit department. So, what audit department does, it just monitors the it just sort of do a auditing of how much money is coming into the system, how much money is going out of the system, whatsoever has come in the system, whether it has been properly recorded or not, whether it is and whatsoever is going out of the system, whether it is going through right means or not. So, that is sort of financial auditing. Similarly, we should have a proper auditing system for water services as well, so that one can understand that where are the gaps, where are the lacks, and what is the sort of whether we are with sufficient capacity, appropriate degree of independence, and sort of resource management is fine or not. So, all those things needs to be considered. Then developing reliable monitoring and reporting mechanism for these assessments, these monitoring and evaluation. It should be basically made open to public that okay, this is what is happening with the particular water policy or particular management program, and then assessing to what extent these policies fulfill the intended goal and the water governance framework are fit for the purpose, and encouraging timely and transparent sharing of these results and adopting new strategies as and when they become available, new strategies, new information, new practices. So, all those things should be adopted, incorporated, and such managed system should actually be able to enhance more trust and engage more stakeholders in the water governance. So, if you grossly see the OECD principles on water governance, which talk about how we can make a more effective water governance, then how we can make a more efficient water governance, and how we can make a more inclusive water governance, how we can develop trust and engagement through these 12 set of principles. So, this has almost, like the OECD group has almost covered the all the important aspect of the water governance. Okay. Now, if you see the water governance cycle, there is again we are calling it cycle because if you see these are all interconnected and interdependent. Okay. You start with the formulation of policies and strategies, then you go for the implementation of those policies and strategies. From the implementation you go for the monitoring, from the monitoring you identify the gaps, challenges, or those kind of thing. So, there has to be evaluation of these things, and then you again change the policy in order to bridge those gaps. In the purpose, these policies and all these are formed based on a set of principles, then it is implemented through a set of actions, it is monitored through a set of indicators. Okay, we will talk about what are the policy indicators in subsequent sessions, but then they are monitored through a set of indicators. Once they are monitored, then we do assess the gaps for the purpose of evaluation, and once we have assessed the gap, we see what are the alternatives available for improvement, what are the new technologies, what are the new mechanisms, what are the new approaches through which we can improve. Okay. So, those needs to be seen, and then we sort of based on where we are standing and what are the further available technologies and setup, we bridge these gaps, and again this cycle comes again the cycle starts with the new policy or new practice which has been adopted. Okay. So, that is how the water governance cycle works. If you see the various building blocks for good water governance, okay. Now, there is a report which talks about the 6 building blocks for good water governance. Okay. These includes a powerful and administrative organization has to be there. Okay. This is very essential for good water governance. So, there has to be an administrative organization with adequate powers. Okay. There has to be a legally embedded system for water management. Now, legal embedding is very important, because otherwise if there are no set of legal principles or legal rules, and if it is basically too much is left open to the policy maker or decision makers, so there will be lot of question on their decisions. Okay. If I am taking a certain decision onto the water governance issues, if there are set guidelines for making that decision, okay, under such and such circumstances it is preferable to go. Let us say if you are having a limited resource, it is preferable to go for domestic supply as opposed to the industrial supply. If I am having that sort of set demarcation, the implementing agency or the administrative organization will be taking that decision and have a solid background to justify their decision. On the other hand, if such legal framework is not available, then somebody taking a decision, okay, I want to give priority to the domestic sector, there will be question from the industrial sector, then how we will grow, what will happen, and blah blah, why you are doing that, this is not fair. Somebody may see an opportunity of corruption or taking some money from the industries, and all that may give actually the priority to the industrial sector also, because it is open, there is no legal framework for guiding principle available for such and such things. So, that leaves sort of a gap, and it is very important to have a legally embedded system for good water management. This is one of the very important building blocks. There has to be a planning system, there has to be adequate financing. Okay. So, who is going to finance, who is going to fund the water services, there has to be a set clear mechanism and financial sources available for that. There has to be a participatory approach and stakeholders involvement, as we have been discussing, and there has to be a cooperation inside and outside the water management. So, these are the important building blocks for the water governance. So, we will close this session over here and discuss some of more aspects of water governance, some good practices of water governance in the next session. Thank you.